Hey everyone, Michael here. So I made a video recently about my grandfather and the fact that he joined the Milicja Obywatelska from 1944 to 1946. And I talked about how I was proud of him for doing that, and understandably, I got some backlash from people who wanted to educate me about the Milicja Obywatelska. And of course, I understand a lot of the comments that I received, because as anyone who knows history, the MO were oppressive. They were connected to the communist regime, and they were often responsible for carrying out repressive orders for the Milicja Obywatelska. So I'm not really here to defend the MO, of course, but at the same time, I wanted to just put some things into perspective, in particularly, my grandfather's decision to join the MO in 1944, and why making a kind of judgment on that decision, I believe, is not something that we should be doing. So first of all, 1944, Poland, as we know, the war didn't actually end in 1945. We can't ignore that from the context. Everything was devastation, and everyone was just trying to survive. And so my grandfather, who did survive as a member of the partisans in the Lubelska region, he was a man who lost almost everything, and he needed a mechanism for survival. The MO were fighting the Germans. The Russians were fighting the Germans, and becoming a member of the MO was absolutely a part of his desire to continue to fight, fight for Poland. There are some people who talked about the Ribbentrop Pact in 1939. My grandfather was a working class guy. He was a Jew. He was fighting for his life throughout the entirety of the war. He buried his own father, watched his mother die, friends, other members of his family. I'm proud that A, he found a way to survive, and B, that he continued to want to fight for Poland. And at that point, from his perspective, it's fair to imagine that his only option was to join the MO. The thing to remember is that in 1944, there was no stable government. Cities were destroyed. There was no stability whatsoever. And the MO in 44 offered, or would have offered, my grandfather stability, this sort of feeling of stability. And this is something that's really important to imagine in this context, in such an unstable time, a kind of instability that we can't fathom. Most of us are housed, we have jobs. We don't know what it's like during the wartime period. And not to mention the fact that there was violence everywhere. Jews and non-Jewish lives were in danger. And certainly becoming a member of the MO would have been a mechanism for just pure survival in 1944. The thing is that, we have this tendency to look back at history and try and determine who was right and who was wrong, completely removing ourselves from the context of that reality. We have far more information about the MO now than anyone at that time would have. Certainly my grandfather. Any information he would have had would have been through conversation, through hearsay, really. I mean, there's no social media back then, and certainly no way to fully understand what the mechanism of the MO would become. My grandfather was at a place where he was hoping for the end of the war. To look back decades later and say, oh, well, that was wrong is, I don't want to say absurd, but I think that it is naive. And look, I can't say for certain why my grandfather joined. I don't have that information. My grandfather died a long time ago. I do know that he made the decision in 1946 to leave. Now, the information we have is that he said it was for mental health reasons, but perhaps he started to understand what the mechanism of the MO was becoming, and he wanted to leave. But, we're not talking about the MO, the post 1947 MO, and certainly not the 70s MO when things started to get really bad. We're talking about this like very early militia, basically, that hadn't been even given the police force status yet. That didn't happen even until 1947. And so to kind of conflate the entire history of the Milicja Obywatelska communism into this entire period of 1944 up until 1990, just is not really actually something that we can do. Of course, we can do whatever we want, but I don't think that it's a kind of accurate and helpful way to look at the context of history. Just as I don't think it's helpful to look at the context of the wartime period and what Polish people did or did not do or could not do in order to help Jewish people. A lot of Jews blame Polish people for not doing more or for those who collaborated, when the reality is that, the number of people who were just trying to survive and didn't know how was the majority. That was the majority of people here. And I tell Jewish people that to judge Polish people too harshly is unfairly. And I ask Jewish people, if they were living in Poland at the time and the opposite were true, would Jews have done any differently? Would they have behaved more heroically if their lives were in danger? We don't, most of us, understand what it means to have our life be in danger. I certainly don't. And until you have been in a scenario where your life is in danger every single day, and you're making decisions from that vantage point, it's very difficult to judge. And so I don't judge my grandfather. I am proud of my grandfather for doing what he did. It's quite possible that his belonging to the MO is the reason that I'm here right now. I'm sure that's not just the same with my grandfather. It's probably your grandfather or your great-grandfather. But I do want to thank people for engaging with me in the discourse. And I hope we continue to do that, because I think that the discourse, the engagement, is the key. As soon as we start to kind of decide this good, this bad, we lose each other. Thanks.